Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. Let me know where you're tuning in from, please. If you are so inclined, you can just tell us all in the chat. So much fun to see where people join us from. I'm in Seattle. So is Aran. Where are you? We'll let a few more people get tuned in and then we'll get started. Hello from Edmonds. Hello. Brooklyn. Yes, of course, Leanne's in Brooklyn. I forgot to say that. Los Angeles, Walla Walla. Hello. Chicago. So great. I love the way that people can tune in from all over the place. DC, hello. All right. We'll let a couple more people tune in and then we will get started. Belltown, hello. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started then. Hello, everyone. I'm Lara Hamilton. I have a cookbook shop here in Seattle called Book Larder. We typically host in-person cooking classes and author talks. And for the past couple of years, we have added virtual author talks to our repertoire as well. And tonight's talk was originally planned in person, and then we decided, this might be better timing wise if we keep this one virtual for now, and hopefully we'll have Leanne back in Seattle sometime later. So thank you if you went through that shift with us. I appreciate it. And those of you who are in other places, thank you for joining us. That's the good part, right? We got to welcome you as well. So thank you for being here. I'm so delighted to welcome Leanne Brown this evening. She is the author, besides her first book, Good and Cheap, of this brand new, fantastic book, Good Enough, a cookbook, embracing the joys of imperfection and practicing self-care in the kitchen. She is going to be in conversation with Seattle author Aran Goyoaga. You may know her as Canele Vanille on Instagram, and she is the author of several books herself. The two of them are going to talk about the book, and of course, they will leave time for questions. So if you could, please use that little Q&A button for your questions, and we will get to as many of those as we can. The talk is being recorded today, and so it will be available on YouTube probably Monday or Tuesday. So if you have to hop off early, or if you want to share it with other people, you can do that as well. And of course, tonight's free, but you can support the talk by purchasing the book from Book Larder if you can. Thank you for everyone that's done that so far. I will drop a link to the book into the chat to make that easy for you. All right, so without further delay, please join me in welcoming Leanne Brown and Aran Goyoaga.
Thanks, Lara. Hi, Leanne. How are you? Hi, everybody.
Hello, everyone.
Well, we've never met, but I'm so thrilled that we get to do this. And I love your book. I spent all week with it, sort of on and off. I would sit with it and read the essays. And I saw myself reflected in a lot of them. And there's one, and you and I and Lara had a little conversation before we joined about how, even though you wrote the book pre-COVID, you turned in your manuscript before lockdown started, that I think there was some sort of like premonition or something, like the book feels very appropriate to the times, because I think there's so much emotional turmoil beyond like, the physical things that people could be having, or scarcity, or beyond all of those things, there's sort of like this emotional turmoil that we're going through. And I think that, I saw so many things that would apply to how we feel today. Yeah. And sorry, I'm talking so much without giving you an opportunity, but I had it in my questions. I love the essay that you call Gratitude is an Experience, Not a Performance. And I think you're going to read it for us. And there's so much in it. So I'm going to actually also read it along.
Thank you for pulling this one out, because I love this one too. And it's sort of there's so much about gratitude, I think, out there right now. And I think that's such a good thing, that we're thinking about gratitude, I think, a little bit differently as sort of this thing we can work with rather than something like, I don't know, like maybe around the Thanksgiving table where it's sort of like, we've all had that experience of like someone being like, okay, it's your turn to say what you're thankful for.
The prescriptive
Yeah,
ways of
right.
showing gratitude. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I wanted to, yeah, I found myself also as seeing all this gratitude stuff out there. I was like, I like this, but I'm struggling to like feel it. It still feels like someone telling me what to do. So anyway, without further ado, I will read this lovely section. So gratitude is an experience, not a performance. Prayer before a meal was a practice I grew up with. Over time, as with so many everyday rituals, I lost the connection, if I ever had one, to its meaning. It felt like an obligation. I knew that taking a moment to be thankful could be a nourishing practice, but the pre-meal prayer just made me feel fake. And years later, despite reading and hearing about the benefits of gratitude practices, I just couldn't get into one. It reminded me of all the many times I've been lectured about gratitude as a child. In my experience growing up, the concept of gratitude mostly came in the form of the phrase, "You should be grateful." Adults use this phrase as a weapon to cut away children's emotions that they find inconvenient. But gratitude is not that moment around the Thanksgiving table when it's your turn to speak and everyone is looking at you, but you don't want to talk in front of your mean drunk uncle and you still feel like crying because your brother told you that you look ugly in your new shirt and you don't want to say the wrong thing and be chastised. That's not being ungrateful. That is being scared. Growing up, I was not a big fan of school. I did okay and I wasn't bullied especially hard, but I was scared a lot of the time. So scared that I would often throw up in the mornings. If anyone had asked me what was going on and genuinely wanted to know, I would have said I was terrified. I was scared of the kids and the teachers, of the pressure and expectations and evaluations, afraid I would do or say something that would be pointed out and ridiculed or punished. These are good reasons to feel reluctant to go to school. And you would think that they would invite deep compassion. Yet the message I got again and again was to hide the fear because it was ingratitude. But I wasn't ungrateful for school. I was scared. For me, gratitude, or its opposite, ingratitude, became bound up with this shame of being afraid. The shame of a feeling I wasn't supposed to have. I felt alone and afraid and unable to show it to anyone because instead I had to perform my gratitude or else I would be rejected. So it makes sense that I was resistant to gratitude practices, even in other more healthy grown-up forms. Sometimes when you're told what you should feel, rather than having your real feelings acknowledged, your feelings get a little tangled up. When I was young and deeply afraid and needed to be seen and understood, I had been told that I should be feeling gratitude instead. As an adult, I had to notice that I misunderstood gratitude. I had to recategorize it from that feeling of being alone in my fear or embarrassment to the feeling of being connected to all the good in my life. I wish I could go back in time and tell that little girl that it's okay to be scared, that you can be scared and grateful at the same time, and that it's okay if you don't feel grateful right now. We can get through this together and feel the gratitude later, on the other side of some deep breaths and some time. Once I realized that gratitude was a good feeling, I was better able to turn toward it. Gratitude, I learned, is that connected feeling of, wow, I am so lucky. So lucky to be here on this planet alive and breathing with the chance to love and connect and feel pleasure. Sometimes it's, man, my bed is just so comfortable. And other days it's, my friends are so strong and make me feel so loved, or, oh, the little bags under my daughter's eyes make me want to kiss them. That gratitude is actually for me. It's not here to be performed so others will accept me. It's for me to feel happy.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I feel like it was my mom reading it to me. It's so nice. Thank you for sharing that. I used to, when I was a kid, not to get into me, but it resonated a lot because oftentimes if I had a day out with my friends or my friends' parents, sort of far away from my mom, I go to bed and I would literally think, and this is something that I bring up in therapy a lot, I am so happy I didn't die today. That's kind of how the fear that I used to have, that it's, like the whole anxiety that I've experience in my life came from, from childhood, like you described, like almost inexplicable fear. So I
always there, like at a certain level.
So I love how you reframed it in a way that it's not so much about being in constant gratitude. That's almost an impossibility.
It is, right? Yeah. It's like that concept sort of like toxic positivity, which I think is out there, which is sort of like when we always say, oh, it's like, yes, there's always a reason to feel good. And I think we are also lucky. And so there always is that. But then if we do that in order to, like those grownups, sort of when I was a kid, like cut away the inconvenient feelings we're having, those have to go somewhere. And that means like maybe going into like your hip, and your hip is sore or whatever, or just like as it just in your body sort of as this residual just discomfort, because we do have to feel so quote unquote negative emotions sometimes, like fear and like sadness and anger and all those sorts of ones that maybe we're like, oh, I don't want to be feeling this right now, but it always belongs is the thing. And so I think when we find a way to validate that, it's almost always after you do that, you accept yourself wherever you are. That's when just after that, you can start to feel those feelings of gratitude, and sincerely. And then it's like actually a nice kind of feeling.
Yeah. And that they're momentary, like how you say, it could be happiness or bliss. It's not a constant thing that we are supposed to feel all the time, but something that, it's, just sometimes we feel it and sometimes we don't. And just acknowledging that's like, I think really powerful.
Yeah. Well, and it's not something that I think our culture is not very emotionally literate. So we struggle, I think, a lot. Like as grownups, you're like, oh, why do I just feel bad all the time? And I think so many people, and I will say, like I described someone in this book at some points that it wasn't until I was sort of doing really well in my career and kind of everything was going my way, and I still felt profoundly unhappy a lot of the time, even like quite depressed and really struggling to sort of do basic things in my life, that I realized something was wrong and that I kind of needed help with that. And I think that's so much, it's like so much sort of stuck emotion and unprocessed stuff, and inability to sort of accept that, yeah, we have difficult experiences that need to be addressed.
I think because, and not to get into, I think we have economic system, sort of our societies are built upon constant improvement, right? Our sort of consumerism is built on wanting to improve constantly, wanting more things. We have to be better, and sort of that carries a lot.
What's the line there with perfectionism kind of? It's like if we're always trying to improve everything about us, how do we ever feel like we're in acceptance of where we're at?
Which brings me to my first point and sort of my list of questions, where you say that there are habits in our society that collectively we have deemed imperfect, and that is your purpose with this book, and your work in general, to dismantle them. And so what are those habits that you see that we need to dismantle?
So I think that, and I'll talk about sort of in terms of cooking, because otherwise it's everywhere. But I think there's so much perfectionism that is just like endemic in our society. Just like you said, I mean, I think it is part of almost capitalism itself. But when it comes to cooking, I realized, and I think this is actually a beautiful moment now that I look back on it, because it was a moment when I really realized like I wasn't alone. Was when I wrote my last book, Good and Cheap. I was so lucky to sort of get to have this wonderful experience of talking to so many people from so many different experiences, and people would often really share their stories with me. There was something about the project that gave a lot of people sort of permission to talk about their experiences with me. And over, I would have this one where people either come up to me in person or email or something, and they'd say, I love what you're doing, but you can't help me. I'm a terrible cook. Like I'm unhelpable kind of thing. And it was always a really rich conversation, because I'd always say like, okay, well, tell me more about that. Like we can't can't really be like an impossible cook. And especially the fact that you're here, that you're interested, you're engaged. I don't see this as a hopeless thing. But so often they would be sharing their reason for, I'd be like, why are you a bad cook? Why do you say that about yourself? And they'd say like, oh, you know, my kid won't eat my food. Or a lot of the time I make something, it just doesn't turn out the way that I want. And I'm like, uh-huh. Like, you know, these sorts of, or sometimes very sadly, it would often be like, oh, someone told me I was a bad cook one time. Maybe in a really like important, like I had a dinner party and, you know, someone whose opinion mattered to me, they told me that. But all of these experiences, I felt so grateful to be able to say like, that's not the measure. Like, you are not a bad cook. And first off, there's no such thing. Like, you can have like bad meals, but you can't fundamentally, like, that's too much to put on yourself. But it was so meaningful to me. And I just kind of couldn't let go of it because I really felt, as I reflected on it, I really saw myself in that as well. Like the way that I had really tied my identity to my abilities with food. I sort of felt like this is like the one thing I'm good at. And so then when I got pregnant and I was really sick for the whole 9 months, I was nauseous the whole time, unfortunately. It was kind of this identity crisis because I like hated food. I had to eat because I was growing a being and like it required sustenance, but it was just awful. Like I didn't enjoy anything about eating. And not only did I not like feeding myself, I was also like, oh my God, I'm supposed to be like making food for people and like developing recipes and being excited about this stuff. And I just, you know, did not want to. And then it just got so existential so fast. It was like, maybe I'm a complete fraud. Maybe food is nonsense and none of this means anything. And it was just so, and I just had to really confront how deeply I felt that the way that I connect with food was kind of like, in some ways, almost like my only avenue to connect with myself and with others. And that was actually sort of saying something about myself and the way that I valued myself that like needed some care and attention. So I'm really grateful for all of that. But that was where all that sort of interest came from, where I began to realize like, this is something that is so endemic and I really see it in the kitchen in this way. And so that made me feel like I kind of have an opportunity here to share something that could, even in a tiny little way, maybe make someone else feel seen and understood. Mm-hmm. Because I think it's like when we feel alone, that's when like, that's basically what trauma is. Like, that's what like something that's too big to feel on your own. And so I think when we all feel like alone in something that we're feeling, maybe like me when I was a little kid in this little essay, like feeling scared. And like, I couldn't tell anyone I'm too scared to go to school because no one will care. No one will listen to that. You shouldn't be scared. You're fine or whatever. Feeling invalidated. It's like, if there's any way that we can, in these small ways, be like, you are not alone. That is actually normal. It can release, I think, some of that. And it allows us to heal and allows us and opens up space inside us, I think, to then have more capacity in the rest of our lives. So when we can undo like little bits of perfectionism, learn to be kind and notice these things in one area, it starts to spill out into all other parts of our lives. So I just felt, that was why I felt kind of called to do it in this area that I think we're not as aware of. I think, cooking and food is not something that is, I think a lot of people are subconsciously really anxious about these things and subconsciously really experiencing a lot of these things, but maybe not as aware. And then, if I can name it and have a chance to think, oh, I am feeling that, and maybe I can let it go. Anytime we can name something, it gives us a chance to actually then let go of it.
Yeah. So how would you say, I mean, I think it's also about meeting people where they are, and there's different stages, and there is place to teach people to perfect something, right? But it's also like understanding that we don't right off the bat.
Like, anything about us though, right? Like it can be like, it's such a joy to learn something and to like slowly gain mastery of it. Like there's nothing more life affirming than that. I think that it's like, it really is a wonderful thing, but we need to do it from a place where it's like, when we fail, we aren't like, this was a waste of time and everything was a failure. And I'm bad because I couldn't.
Understanding that everything, in college, I had a friend, I remember it was the first time ever that I had failed exams. Like I had been a super good student, always top
Same
of
in
the class. When
college
I
too.
got
I
to
remember
college, I started
rude,
failing.
annoying.
A friend told me, she said, but you studied. So even if you didn't pass, all of that time that you put into it, it's not like it's been wasted. Nothing is for nothing. And so that always stuck with me about sort of the perseverance of something. And I know we're talking, this is kind of becoming like a generalized thing, but I do think it applies to food and how we present ourselves in the world.
Well, is it like, well, and it's interesting you bring up school and testing too, because I think that is the experience that many of us have when we go into the kitchen, is it's all about, we take a test. Yes, we know, and people tell us, oh, you ultimately you just need to learn stuff.
Mhm.
This is stuff we need to learn. But at the same time, we are being evaluated, often very harshly, and given a huge amount of pressure and told like, well, if you don't get these grades, you're not going to get into the next thing, and then the next thing, and then your life's going to be completely ruined, and you're going to be in a gutter. And it's just all very intense. And so it's sort of like, okay, we have this one message saying like, learn and just do your thing.
Yeah.
And another one that's like, but if you don't. And so it's like we take that into the kitchen. And I think we also, and part of it is a lot of the places people are learning how to cook are often these sorts of, again, capitalistic sort of shows. Like their shows are contests. In some ways, even Instagram and like the media itself is like a beauty contest in a way. And none of these things are bad in and of themselves. They make sense. But again, I think subconsciously we end up comparing ourselves to that, or thinking like, that's what I should be doing. And if I'm not doing that, then something is, or I'm like not living, I'm a bad cook, I'm a bad adult, I'm a bad parent. If I'm not kind of hitting that standard, I'm not getting an A every time. And it's like, it's just not cooking, especially for ourselves in our lives, is not, nobody's grading you. And if they are, it's you. And like, what kind of a grader of yourself do you want to be?
I
You have
think
standards for different situations, right?
I think it goes back to performance, like what you were talking about. Gratitude is that sometimes we cook as an act of performance instead of as an act of self-worth, which you also
and there may be reason
talk
for
about in the book
that is appropriate, but when we're in a professional environment, I think that can be appropriate. But I think when we take that into like family dinner, where actually it's like, I can think so many times actually, like my mother growing up would get very stressed out about dinner, and then when she would come to the table, she would almost like not even be there. And I, and that's completely common, and I don't blame her for that or anything, but it's like, we all want to kind of just be together. Most of the time, that's kind of the goal. And so I think sometimes it takes almost like a humbleness to go like, what, putting this meal on the table was quite a lot of work at the end of a hard day, and it took me out of myself, so I couldn't really be present. So what if we simplify things so we can, if we value being together more than the bigger, fancier meal? I think a lot of the time we'd find that we would probably prefer the latter, or at least there are periods of our lives or times in our lives where we prefer that.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I feel like I wish people could see me on a daily basis cooking for my family, because it's a little more disjointed than what people might think. And just like, sometimes it's about, I have 2 teenage kids, so it's like volume. Speed, like it's really not as romanticized as it might appear. Exactly. But I had this other question. I mean, I'm kind of going all over the place, but I had it towards for the end of our talk, but since we're talking about it, and it's entertaining, and you have an essay about social anxiety, loneliness, and entertaining, which I feel I'm feeling this very much right now, because it's, we're so isolated and unable to entertain. And so, I mean, right now we can't, but like, how do you address, what is your advice, or how do you address kind of the two seemingly opposing ideas of like, social anxiety and entertaining and opening your home and being a good host and good cook and all these things, and like how somebody who might feel identified in this, how can they approach it? What kind of frames and glasses should they be looking at so they kind of feel okay with
They
this.
can handle it. Yeah. Well, so I think actually kind of what you just said, which was having some anxiety about it, having people in your home, wanting to cook well, wanting to connect. When you think about all those things that you're wanting to do with one situation, that's going to be like, that's a lot, actually. That's a lot to do. It's a lot to ask of yourself. So the first thing I would say is just to be aware. I think a lot of the time there's this attitude of like effortlessness and looking like it was, this just came out of nowhere.
Cinderella. I can just appear.
Yeah, like it's just, oh, this is just how I am all the time. And it's just like, and I know that comes from this, I think it comes from a desire actually to connect. But unfortunately, I think it's very disconnecting because it's just not true. And then over time, I think that really performance that we kind of get into then leads other people to believe that that's how they should also be. And that's kind of the only way to like have a nice time. But I think almost anyone who really like entertains and gives parties, it's really hard work, but you do it because you really want to offer something. And I imagine, Aran, that you're the same, like,
yeah, it's for me,
like,
you said earlier,
like love, like it's like,
yeah, it's just
yes,
the only way I
a lot of
really
time on
know how to communicate or how to, how to be properly. It's so hard for me to be in a social, like at a party and just being small talk. I can't take it. So for me, it's like having people at home and being busy cooking and just even being a little bit messy.
Yeah. Well, it allows you to be offering something to people, and something loving and something that shows that you care without always having to be like in the center of things. And so I think it's about kind of maybe walking a line with yourself where you are offering that love and that care through your food, and that's kind of your thing. And then whatever allows you to be as comfortable as possible with then taking that next step and trying to be with people. And so I think sometimes it is about like, planning a menu and really going for it and like offering all of that love. And then I think it's also about scaling back and noting like, when am I going to hit the line where I'm doing so much that I'm going to be stressed and dysregulated, and knowing that, okay, if you're a person who, even if they're close friends, if you have a few people over, it does get you a little nervous. Because I'm the same way, even my dear friends, I love to focus people like one or two at a time, but more than that, I just get kind of overwhelmed. So it's like, how can I best support myself to have the experience that I want? And I know and it's like, again, it's like, oh, that sounds selfish. You're supposed to be like doing this for other people, but other people will kind of follow when you're the host, like you set the vibe, like
when you're comfortable, so other people will be comfortable. Yeah,
exactly. And so it's like, what will actually allow you to be as comfortable as possible? And I think that requires being really honest with yourself. So sometimes, that is going to mean like really going for it and doing a bunch of planning and being ready for it. But maybe at other times, like, I don't know, this past Thanksgiving, I had a lot of people reach out to me and say like, they just did not want to do all the things this year. And it was and like everything, it was more expensive than usual, all this stuff. And it was like, then don't.
Yeah. I wonder how we're going to go back to entertaining if we're going to be so utterly excited and overperforming. We'll want to overperform, or we'll just all forget to bring our
overperform with like the food, but then we'll still all be wearing sweatpants. Like,
I just don't, it's hard for me to imagine what that's going to be like, how we're going to evolve. But I want to go back to more practical part of the book, which is it's funny because there's so much I see the tension in the book of like, here are overarching kind of intellectualized ideas of self-worth, anxiety, but at the same time there is a pragmatic approach to it, which is establishing a lot of rituals and habits, right? I do feel like without it being even a meal planning, you don't even call it like meal plan, like buy these things on Sunday and blah, blah, blah. There's a section where you actually talk about pantry and establishing yourself, which I think it is like when you're trying to kind of conquer an issue, I think it is like you have to look at it for what it is, but then you also have to establish kind of action, like
Yeah.
steps.
Like, how are you to bring, well, because like, what is your motivation for making a meal plan? And I think that's for me. And in this book, I want to offer it as a solution to like not an unpeaceful mind, to like sort of a sense of like worry about what's going to come next, and that sort of sense of overwhelm, like too much like cognitive load. It's like I will say I'm not naturally, and you had shared, Aran, that you don't really meal plan, and I will say admit like I don't do either. I don't, but it's sort of something that I've tried to do more of, because I noticed that when I do it, even though I'm kind of like I'm resentful about it, and then I'm kind of like I feel almost caged by like, well, what if I feel like doing this that day instead? It's like, well, then you just can't, like nobody's making the rules. But like I've often felt very oddly resistant to it. But when I do it, I notice that it's quite a relief. Like it allows more room for me to enjoy just the process of cooking, because I know that the sort of decisions have been made. There isn't this, it's almost like I wanted to stimulate my creative juices. And I think that's maybe for professional reasons. But it's like, if I've already made a decision about what's going to be for the meals in the week, then I'm not as open to like those creative juices, but I'm also not giving myself pressure that if I don't come up with a creative idea, like we don't have a plan. So it's sort of something to go, I think, back and forth with. And for me, there have been definitely periods of my life, like with, having a kid, and then actually like during COVID, I think meal planning was really, really important because we were shopping so much less frequently. And it just gave us all like this sort of sense of security. And it's just a really, really practical thing. And I think if you can think of it not as like, this is the like good girl, good boy, like check marky thing, but really like an actual, like a bit of peace that you're giving yourself every week. It's I really like it.
For me, the reason why I don't do I think the only area, not the only area, but the area that I really, I mean, it's my work. And I grew up in a family that was constantly cooking and eating. And our habit was, I'm from Spain, so shopping every day for the food you're going to eat. We eat the same things all the time. So don't think that because I don't do meal planning that I'm eating some exotic the same things, beans, lentils, whatever it is, a stew. But I think it is because, it just takes away, it's just simplifying. When you have a plan and you stick to the plan, it will take away the anxiety. And so I do appreciate that. And I do think that for people who have trouble feeding themselves, not for scarcity, but just for whether it's self-worth, they're in a rut or whatever it is, which you talk about all these things.
And especially if there is, if money is an issue, making those plans. And when we plan we also get these other efficiencies, which is we usually don't waste as much food because we haven't like gone and bought some things and then forgotten that a bunch of them were at the back.
It's the biggest wasting food to me. I mean, I think for everybody, but it's the biggest sort of heartache for me to.
I know.
And so how did you, for those, I mean, I don't have your previous book. But if you can tell us a little bit about your journey to cooking, but also like you're really focused on equity and accessibility, and your previous book, Good and Cheap, was about this. And so how was that evolution for you?
I mean, they really felt like, to me, it just felt like the natural progression. Good and Cheap was my master's thesis, and it was really it started out that way. Obviously it became sort of something different, but I got my master's in food studies at NYU, and I was just really struck by basically the problems around inequity in food. They would seem to be the most sort of like overwhelming, and they were so overwhelming that I really felt I basically felt kind of powerless about them. And as a way to feel, and there are massive issues, like any massive issue, like no one person there are no solutions to
Yeah.
these types of problems. Like the problem of hunger in this country is like a longest emergency, and it remains like an emergency, and yet and so it was really, really important. And I also knew that I like just had this sort of capacity, just like as a home cook, knowing in my experience, like just how much we can get out of, we can do a lot with a little when we know how to cook. And seeing how many folks were sort of struggling who just didn't have that knowledge, or didn't even have like a bit of that knowledge, like even just a little bit helps, like just to have a few meals in the rotation, to know how to, using inexpensive ingredients like pasta and canned tomatoes and these kinds of things, and being sort of shown how to do these things could make such a difference. And so I wanted to create sort of just offer something. And so that was what Good and Cheap was. And it was, it started as my thesis project, and I never thought it would be as popular as it became. It was wild. And with that, I think came, frankly, pressure and responsibility. I felt a sense of such connection to so many people who reached out to me and told me that this really meant something to them, that it helped them, that they felt seen, they felt understood, and that it was, and then also just was literally like a useful thing for so many, that they were learning from it. And is getting into so many communities in a way that I would never have expected. And that made me just want to like open my heart to all of like what, like cooking was sort of this thing I was offering. And in a way it was this message of like, we can do a lot with a little. And then as I also had to examine like, it's almost like good enough is like the other side in some way. Like it's like we can do a lot with a little, and sometimes we should do less, sometimes like it's the right thing for us to actually do less. And I to me it was always implied that like, for every day you're making like a beautiful eggplant and tomato pasta, you're also totally still eating a peanut butter sandwich. Like that's still okay, that's like real. But it was like this offering of like sort of more and beauty and all of this kind of thing. And then I also felt like we needed this message of like, it's okay also to go easy on yourself and to do less, and to not feel like you're only successful, you're only feeding your body enough, you're only feeding your children and your community well enough if you are like always like striving. And I just felt, and like I had to examine that in myself and all of that. So
I feel like giving people, with what you have given people, the ability to realize that they can feed themselves, gives them independence, opens up so much way, like kind of breaking the cycle of associating comfort food with cheap junky food, and that's all we can eat. Like when you break that cycle in a family or in a community, that's, I feel like the biggest difference I see, and maybe it's because I work in food, but the biggest thing I see between how Americans live and how I grew up very like working class. My grandparents on my dad's side were dirt poor. They grew their food, and they had holes in their socks, and sort of like, but we always ate well. We always and it doesn't mean we were eating caviar or anything, but we always had there's a saying, and I say it a lot, there's a saying in Spanish that is comer con de cuchara, which means to eat with a spoon, meaning that you're taking a bowl of like a stew with vegetables, maybe meat, beans, and you eat that, and you made it yourself, and it's nourishing for you and for the ones that you have around. It's fuel. It's kind of seeing food beyond, like sometimes it just rubs me the wrong way when I see comfort food and immediately there's a bowl of like mac and cheese, which I get it.
Totally
it
agree.
can be, but it's like, why there's that sort of like perpetuating this idea of like mac and cheese is the only comfort food. And so
well, it feels very,
advertising.
Yes, it feels like it's a capitalism thing. It's sort of like comfort food is meant to, comfort, it's so fundamental, and it's going to be individual for everyone. We think about like food, we are fed by like a parent, by a loving being, like when we're babies, like it's so important to how we grow, how we attach, how we connect, all of that stuff, so meaningful. And so of course the foods that become like our comforts that really feel like they help us either when we're like physically sick or we don't feel well are going to be in a cultural context and just in the context of our homes and what we are given. And so yeah, I really resent it too, that it's sort of like bar food. They're like, this is our comfort foods, or like
a hamburger with these and
like
so
there's no such thing. Yeah, so, it's an individual thing.
So I think like if you're able to, when you as an author, right, like if you are able to convey that and teach people and reach all these people and kind of educate them on this and how they can feed themselves. And of course, I mean, I love, you know, I love French fries and I love all those things, but just like having, I think it gives you understanding cooking and understanding what's available, what's inexpensive, what you can access.
And just notice with yourself, I think sometimes when someone says mac and cheese is comforting, you're like, okay, but maybe you don't notice, it's like, is it actually for you? Like, does that make you feel good? Because it can make you ignore, I mean, we're taught so much also to ignore our bodily sensations and ignore hunger, to like, it's tough to like ignore your hunger, or like, I mean, it's not even getting into sort of, this is a whole big thing, but like our hunger sensations are so important to listen to. And even what feels good in our bodies, like if you eat something that is really heavy, it can actually leave you feeling kind of bad, even if maybe for a couple moments it tasted good. And I mean, maybe it's just getting older, but I noticed that kind of thing so much more. And so those 2 minutes of pleasure of eating something often is just like really not worth, like, I know it's going to leave me feeling quite bad. And so eventually, as I eat something that maybe sits better with me, maybe that's like lighter, and sometimes it's almost like that becomes more delicious over time as I associate it with feeling good in my body too. Because like your body feeling good is just as pleasurable, if not sometimes more so, than like the deliciousness of like food in the moment too. So it's just like, there's just so much for us to learn.
We have so much. I mean, I've had an eating disorder when in my early 20s. So I have all kinds of emotional attachments to food. And I say all these things with no judgment because I'm the first one. And I love chapter 5, when you're struggling. And you talk about safe foods, which I thought when I read the title, I was like, wow, safe foods, it sounds so restrictive, right? But it's not about that. And it's, you know, redefining comfort foods and sort of like all these recipes. The first one is self-love potion, which I thought, okay, I'm going to find like mac and cheese, like I said, or I'm going to find like all these things that are typical, but no, they're actually like really thoughtful. Lime tart spritzer, orange cheesecake brownies, everyday summer berry cookie bars, cornbread. Like there's like, you know, things that are just kind of extra lotus bowl, which that would totally be like my comfort food. Green soup, you know, that would be my comfort food. So and pasta, I mean, yes.
Of course.
We had that pasta, but well, yeah, Brussels sprouts, pasta, like there's just like really, I love the ideas that are not just like, how do you say it? So expected or, you know.
Well, and they're kind of what's comforting to me, because that's what I realized about, it's kind of why this book is so personal, was that I realized like in order to express these ideas, I could kind of only tell my story. If I tried to be like, what could be comforting for like it would just become a mishmash and not meaningful. Whereas when I can express sort of what works for me in these situations and try to explain why and how I got there, then maybe someone else can kind of go on that journey into their own experience and find really what can work for them and feel, you know, permission to think about things and experience things beyond, like, oh, well, I feel bad, so I guess I should eat chocolate. That's what TV tells me.
Yeah, it's just like all those things, like the stereotypes about like the wine and the chocolate. It's like, no, you can have green soup and it's actually delicious and like it is comforting and
all those herbs going in with the spinach is such a like amazing aroma and it always makes me feel, I think the thing that I express, it's like kind of letting your kid side come into play, I think is really healing a lot of the time. And that anything that makes me feel kind of like I'm a witch, like making a special potion, amazing.
I love that. Let's see, let me look through my notes. I think we need to open it to questions, but I mean, I had a question that's very open, which is how to establish a routine, which goes with, I think it's so important with meal planning and
Yeah.
sort of like looking at food as also like a building block of our emotions, right? Like we're sort of like our physical well-being is so tied to our emotions and our mental health. And so how, when someone's kind of lost in this, like, how do you get, how do you get started?
I think the key is, I really think it's actually as simple as not thinking about the outcome of what you're making. It's like, pick something and don't get lost in what it'll turn out like. Just kind of like allow the process to unfold and be like as present as you can with that and see kind of where it takes you. And I think, I will say a lot of it's okay if it doesn't turn out well, and that can be something to learn. But that when you kind of give yourself, it's like, I guess like in establishing an exercise routine, I think they always say like showing up is 90% of it. And it really is true. And it's the exact same when it comes to cooking and meal preparation. And so I'd say, yes, just focus on the process, focus on showing up and see what you can do, and make sure that you're telling yourself that's the win. Like, you did it. That's the measure. I was there. That's the only measure. And then over time, I think it's like with any habit, you do it for a month or 2 months, you start to go like, wow, look at how many meals I've actually made. And some of them are really great. And look at how I really learned that I learned from Leanne Brown that I should zest every single citrus in my house and never throw out the zest, because that's sad. And yeah, she was right. And it's just so good. And now I put citrus in my oatmeal. I'm of course joking, but I think so much of it is, about establishing that experience. And then, oh my gosh, I mean, when you can just allow yourself to enjoy the process of cooking, there's so much sensory pleasure in cooking. I think that a lot of us are not always open to, because we're so concerned about it. But it's in allowing yourself to enjoy the sensory experience of it that will actually, you'll be teaching your body. Like, you notice like the sound of the chopping, or you like hear the bubbling of the pasta water, or you are like cutting the lemon and it like squeezes out, and the lemon juice like gets in your cuticle and it like kind of hurts. You're like, oh, like you're like, there's so much that you can learn if you are really present with your senses. And there's great pleasure to that as well. And I think that's ultimately what leads to a habit that can stick, is if there's something about it that feels like it's nourishing in and of itself. And if like the experience of putting together the food is nourishing, always the food will already, because it's just, so long as it's food, it's nourishing. And it's going to be good enough. And if you have goals like, I really want to like eat healthier in some, I guess if that's sort of your goal, I would always say like, try to figure out like, am I trying to eat more vegetables, or like be a little more specific with yourself, because I think sometimes eating just healthier can be really overwhelming. There's kind of too much information about what that even means. But to have like goals of listening to your body and maybe like eating more fruits and vegetables, I think those also can be better met. Those goals can be achieved when we start with these like simpler routines, where it's like every like the classic like January conundrum, like, oh, I've decided I've never run before in my life, but I'm going to run every day. And then it's like, well, 12 days in, you're like, I am in pain and I have to stop. And then you feel like you failed. And it's just like, it's not a bad thing to set the bar at a reasonable level. It's like, it's appropriate. It's like the only way you're really going to like help yourself kind of get through things. So I think it's just all of those things. And all of it comes down to, I guess, the same thing, which is to be like really kind and generous with yourself and believe that you have good intentions. I think so often when we establish routines where it's like we're trying to like get yourself into, you're bad and you've done these bad things and I need to like make you do it. And it's like, that actually doesn't work. It's like never once worked for me. I will always rebel against that at some level, And so over time, if we're really, really kind to ourselves, I think and we believe that we actually want to cook well, and we believe in ourselves that we want to eat well, as I believe, everyone does. I think that was one of my biggest things with Good and Cheap. This response, I was always so frustrated. There was this idea that like, people like want to eat badly and like don't care about themselves and their families. And it's like, that's such nonsense. Like everyone given the opportunity and kindness will feed their bodies to the best of their ability, because that's like how we're meant to be as human beings. And so if we can treat ourselves, I think, with that kindness, it's like something that actually allows us to continue.
Yeah. Well, that's a
Great
beautiful
question.
I want to end our little philosophical but very practical
mix of both, I hope.
I didn't get to all the things, but I did want to share some of the sort of the recipe. I wanted to also ask you like how you chose to categorize the recipes into chapters, because I think that would be so, because you are dealing with like these very like ethereal ideas, and then you have to put that into kind of a practical way that relates to it. So anyway, that's
I have to give a lot of credit to my editor for that. We were struggling for a while with like, how do we because we knew we couldn't do like appetizers, entrees, desserts, like that was so not the point. And we had all these ideas, and it was like how to mix them up. And my editor kind of said like, what if I've noticed that there's this sense of sort of like getting through the day, like morning, afternoon, and evening, because like it's almost like there's different needs that we have, or I'll say like I have different needs at different times of day. Like I'm not much of a morning person, I'm more of an like there are different capacities at different times of day. So there was that, rather than sort of thinking of like breakfast is has to have eggs in it and like that kind of idea. And then getting through your life, so sort of like hard times, more expansive and joyful times, trying to connect with others, trying to connect with yourself. It was like these ideas like what, and I think comes back to that idea that this is a cookbook where I was trying to reestablish it, what home cooking is, like that home cooking is something we do in our lives, not around like appropriate like breakfast, lunch, and dinner at a restaurant. And here's meeting others' expectations. It's all about kind of ourselves. So with those sort of categories in mind, we sort of just like put everything where it felt right and where it really like worked for me best. And then I try to express that as best I can too.
Yeah, like best friend salad. That's what I would eat for breakfast, actually.
I would want to serve that to you. Yeah, I think that came from like the meal. I was thinking about how we often, for others, it's like when someone else comes out, I always want to make something like really healthy and lovely for them, so that it's like they feel really like nourished and light and weak and like good. And I don't always do that for myself. Like I'll be like, oh, whatever, I'm just gonna have like this toast because it's fast or something, or something heavier, and I won't feel as good. But that I almost always like really do want to take that time for like that very special sort of best friend.
Well, I think ultimately we all want to be with people, and sometimes our friends are the kind of, they keep us accountable for ourselves. And, when we have to feed them, then we feed ourselves. And so like having that companion, whether it's a partner or a friend or whoever it is, it's like I think really important.
Ground you.
Show up for cooking and and not in a, like you said, even toast, it's amazing. Like I love a good
oh, it's great. But I had to note, I was like, oh, I always want to spend a little bit more time on a friend. And so how can I then maybe bring that energy back to myself sometimes too, to just notice like, oh, if that's how I think someone really special to me wants to be treated, maybe I can spend that on myself too.
Yeah.
Leanne, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure we get a couple of these questions in here as well from our audience. So you were just mentioning the best friend salad. Elise would like to know if there are 2 different recipes in your cookbook that you're especially excited to share for whatever reason.
Of course I like so many of these. That's why they're all in here. The one I'm finding myself talking about a lot, because it's January and it's citrus season, and I'm obsessed with citrus. I have been for many, many years. And I have this lovely citrus refresher pasta, and I actually have 3 recipes in the book that use the combination of lemon, lime, and orange together, which somehow, they're all like the common citruses. They're like relatively available and they're all in season right now. And somehow when they come together, all of them, it's like the most magical, overwhelmingly delicious thing, that's so much more interesting than the sum of its parts. And so I have this pasta that's basically just spaghetti, but you could use any pasta, of course. And then you take the zest and the juice of a lemon, a lime, and an orange, and you mix it with olive oil and just a little bit of Parmesan or Romano or any sort of a sharp cheese, or you could skip the cheese entirely. And then I use basil, but you could use any kind of herb, or again, skip the herb. And it's literally like you just mix it. You don't even need heat or anything. Like it's a cold sort of sauce, and you toss it with the pasta, and it's just like, so I think it's really fun at this time of year because it's like really sunshiny, and it's also, there's a lot of like, of course, I have like the cozy bolognese, the cold, which of course is like sort of a classic comfort food. But I think that pasta and citrus is such a glorious combination. It's very like sunshiny in the mouth, and it's so fast to make. And I don't mean like fast, like you have to be like running around the whole time. I mean, like you put the pasta onto boil, and you like chill out and slowly, zest your stuff and juice your stuff. And, you can take your time, like be leisurely with that. Take so many deep breaths. It's like, let go, bring your shoulders down from your ears, all those good yoga things.
I'm gonna be doing that when I'm cooking.
I'm like, oh, I'll just do it now while we sit here. Okay.
And so while you're doing that, you're not like, oh my gosh, I need to be toasting the nuts. I need to be doing, because often we're doing multiple things in the kitchen. Sometimes that's so fun, but sometimes it's also really nice to just do one very simple thing at a time. And then by the time the pasta's boiled, you're definitely done making the sauce, because it really is so simple, and you just toss it and you're done, and it's there. And of course you could add like, veggies, or if you have leftovers, you could like add extra stuff into it. It would go with so many things. Brussels sprouts would be wonderful in there. The flavors would be great. You could add like bacon, you could go to town with it, but it's at its base, it really is very, very simple, and pleasing, and a little bit different, and sort of tells you hopefully to like show up and just be easeful with yourself. It's like the opposite of those those TV shows, and they mean so well, where it's like 30-minute meals.
Yeah.
And if someone is making, like someone who's a professional in a professional kitchen is like going for it, like working the whole time, like making, and they're like, look, I made all this in 30 minutes. Like,
totally.
Yeah, you can technically do that, but that looks exhausting.
Yeah. I laugh at books like that. Sometimes we'll get books in the store where it's like 30 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever. And I'm like, okay, maybe as long as you don't count the chopping and the boiling and it's like, it would take me that long to just assemble all the things. But anyway.
Well, it's like, for who? Yeah, that's why.
Yeah, exactly. That's a relative term.
It really is. Yeah.
So another guest would like to know if you are cooking with your kiddo yet, and what's your favorite thing to make together?
We cook all the time. We've been cooking since she was like hanging out on top of me while we were cooking together. We make banana bread all the time. The banana bread in the book is sort of like our thing that we do, but we make everything together. She really, we enjoy the ritual of just like making her lunch, like make her lunchbox for the next day at school together. She really likes being a part of it. It's like a little thing that we do together, and I'm grateful for it, because she's really taught me to slow down with like, first, like accept it's going to be a little bit messy when she's doing it with me, and to just think about like, how do I want to be with that? Like, what do I want to teach her about how important, so she helps me really slow down. And so there are times when I ask her not to cook with me if I'm really like trying to do a bunch of things in a quick time period, or I'm really grumpy. Then I'm just like, honey, I like can't, I'm not going to be nice to hang out with. So we're going to have to not, but we make lots of stuff together. We love She really likes like measuring things. We've been doing a lot of baking. She's gotten really into like putting the cup into the flour and like pushing it off. Like she feels really good about that. It's like she shakily like puts it in. It's so sweet. Yeah, we cook a lot together, but we also just like assemble snacks. And she's always been the thing I am always impressed with her. She loves to taste everything as it goes in.
Mm.
And so at this point, she's finally accepted that flour is kind of gross. And so she won't like eat raw flour. She's eaten raw cinnamon before. That was like a like amazing, terrible moment. But she loves to taste everything as she goes. And I think that's such a beautiful thing that she's so interested in the process. And because she's still 4.5 and she's still like constantly rejects so many foods, and it's off like the foods we'll have made together. She'll be like, oh, this is so great. But she'll sort of fake like, yeah, I like it. And then like not really eat it because she's not into it. But I think it just all establishes so much good experience, and hopefully the experience that the process of making food is pleasurable and connecting, and regardless of what we're doing, and how much even she likes it, which is sort of been a neat thing.
Yeah. And then most used kitchen item.
I mean, the truth is like my cutting board and my knife, but that's very boring. I think I will say my microplane. It's like the little like mini grater. That's
All
really
that citrus zesting.
Yeah, gotta citrus somehow, and that's the best way to do it.
And then Sheena had more of a comment rather than a question. She says, it's almost 6 p.m. I have planned dinner and my kids have COVID. Sorry, Sheena.
Oh,
I will probably just feed my family something on toast and some deviled eggs. It will be good enough. Thanks,
Yes,
Leanne.
well, Sheena is my old neighbor. She moved to Seattle a few years ago, but we were neighbors in New York. So hi, Sheena, love you. And I'm sorry that everyone has COVID again.
I love deviled eggs, so that would be
I
good.
know, right? I'm like, oh, that sounds like a really good idea.
I
Actually,
know.
deviled eggs
On
in
bread,
so
that's
long.
amazing. Like an egg sandwich.
Yeah, totally. This was so much fun. Leanne, congratulations on the book. Aran, thank you so much for leading
Congratulations,
such a thoughtful
Leanne.
conversation.
I
Yeah.
have so many sticky notes.
Oh, I know. This is totally we always get pushed all of these books in January, which it just makes me angrier every year. This like new year, new you, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, this is exactly the kind of thing I feel like is a lovely way to start the year, in that I mean, for me personally, at least, it's just such a time of reflection and introspection and kind of thinking about kind of how I want to be in the world. What's that? Sorry.
The winter, it's like the last time you want to be starting some big new thing. It's like, no, we want to be quiet.
Exactly. I just want to take a nap. So I think this is just a really lovely way to start the year. And so congratulations. And yeah, I love it.
Thanks
so
for hosting this,
for writing it.
and thank you for connecting with it and sharing that. It really makes me feel seen, and I'm really touched. This was a delight.
Oh, it was really fun. And I hope that we can do something in person, if not this year, then for the next book.
Hopefully this year. Don't say that.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Stay
everyone.
safe and healthy.
Bye. Thank you.
Have a lovely weekend, everyone. Bye.
Bye.